day so far? Great, good, I'm glad to hear it. Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for preparing to be a great audience member today by putting away your tech, your devices. We really appreciate that, so we can just give our undivided attention to our very special guest today. Before we start, I do want to just give a couple thank yous. I just want to say thank you to the Fremd boosters. If you have family at home who are boosters, please let them know how much they are appreciated. I also want to say thank you to our tech crew up top. Thank you for running things so smoothly today and for the rest of the week. We really appreciate the work that y'all do. So like I said, we have a really awesome special guest today. I think y'all are going to enjoy a lot. Our guest this hour is a professional author, and her stories and essays have been published in places like Best American Essays, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, The Believer, and many others. She recently, but just a fun fact, finished a story about how she found a way to explore anger through throwing axes. So be sure to put that away for questions maybe later. If you like what you hear today, we do have copies of her most recent collection. It's called The Wrong Way to Save Your Life. We have copies of that for sale today for $16. So if you enjoy what you hear, which I know that you will, please consider purchasing one of those. So with that all said, why don't we just put our hands together, please, to welcome Megan Steelstride.
It's always interesting to me to be in high schools. This is where I first figured out that I wanted to be a writer. And so I'm wagering many of you are experiencing that as well too. My dad was my high school principal, so I spent a lot of time trying to hide out from him in the hallways so he couldn't know what I was doing. I also spent a lot of time cutting class, but usually I would end up at the library and I would sit in the corners and read sci-fi. So that was kind of me for the first 15 years of my life, was hiding in libraries and reading sci-fi. And then the librarian handed me a book one day. I just remember sitting on the floor and I had my Tolkien or my Octavia Butler or whatever, and then the librarian kind of slid the book out of my hand and slid a different book into my hand. I don't know if your librarians do that here, try to put the magic work in your hand, but it was a book, it was a memoir by a guy named Richard Wright. It was called Black Boy. And in the particular memoir, the character of Richard gets a library card for the first time. And he's sitting on the floor of the library. He's reading a book by a white novelist named Dreiser, and he's able to imagine what goes on in the minds of white people for the first time, the characters of black men in the Jim Crow South. And it was sort of this wild moment where I was sitting on the floor of the library, and he was sitting on the floor of the library, and we were kind of connected together. And I grew up in a really small Michigan town, super sheltered. And that was sort of a moment that cracked the world open for me a little bit. And I thought, God, I want to do that. I want to do something like that. So I came to Chicago and I went to undergrad for creative writing, and then I went to grad for education because I wanted to learn how to help teach people how to make their own stories. And I paid for all of that school bar. So I was a bartender for 15 years in a brunch restaurant in Chicago called Bongo Room. Maybe some of you have been there. They have very good pancakes. Those pancakes, in fact, paid off my college loan, so that's a thing that could actually happen once upon a time. But while I was bartending there, I would get really into the way that people would tell me stories. Because that's what bartending is, right? Is anybody can pour a bourbon or an orange juice or whatever it is you're pouring. But it's how people tell stories and how people listen to stories. So I really got into how we tell stories out loud and how the techniques that people use are very similar to what I was learning from Kafka and Richard Wright and Toni Morrison and all these writers who I loved. Right? So they're using the same aspects of craft. So this is me back when I'm 21, 22 years old, and I helped start a theater company in Chicago called Second Story. And we travel around the country and we help people tell their own stories. Many of the people that we work with don't have any kind of training in writing or performance, but they've lived these incredible lives that crack the world open in the same way that Richard Wright did for me so many years ago. A big part of our work is working with musicians and theater directors, theater artists. So we have partnerships with the Goodman and the Steppenwolf and the Neo-Futurists. And so all of our work is directed and all of it is scored. So I've done performances with DJs and with rock bands and at Buddy Guys with blues musicians and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. I had a whole orchestra score a story in mind to Madonna's tune Like a Prayer. That was my favorite song back in the day. Anyway, so I'm going to kind of give you an example of the work that we make. I first wrote this one after I spent a week working with a whole bunch of high school students at Interlochen. Their work kind of kicked my ass. Like it was better than what I was doing at the time, and I think it was better because they were brave, and I wasn't being as brave as they were. So I wanted to make something that was worthy of them. So this is what I made. It's called F. The summer between high school and college, I worked nights at an Arby's in a truck stop near Dexter, Michigan. A cute, idyllic, white picket town, which to me was just a piss break on the way to Detroit. I mopped the floors of that piss break. I wiped the booths with Lysol after truckers ate their dinner. I stood behind the counter in my blue visor and took orders for beef and cheddar sandwiches, which I wasn't allowed to make because even though my birthday was in August, I was still a year too young to use the deli-style slicer that shaved roast beef. Question: why is 18 the acceptable age to operate potentially hazardous machinery? Is there a certain maturity I gained that summer between high school and college? Did I become more knowledgeable, like snap your fingers and suddenly you're this totally together person who can be trusted with industrial-sized blades, the same way that snap 10 years old and you can shoot a gun, snap 16 and you can drive, snap 21 and you know how many vodkas are too many vodkas? More than anything, I wanted something to happen. I was invincible, on the edge of my life. Do you know that feeling? Standing on a 3 or 10 or 20-story rooftop, leaning forward, the whole world's spread out before you, and you think, God, what if I jump? What if I fly? But I couldn't. I had 3 more months till I left for college and an 8-hour night shift. Arby's sauce, Jamocha shakes, curly fries poured into wire mesh baskets and lowered into the deep fryer, splattering boiling oil like knife tips on my skin that hurt like hell but still felt good because I was feeling something. Anything besides my incredible 17-year-old need. The summer between high school and college is supposed to be revelatory in some way, right? I pictured mine like a coming-of-age sort of rom-com dramedy involving the following. 1, cushy day job selling muffins at the farmer's market. 2, home to my cute, idyllic white picket family. And 3, nights making out with the boy I loved. Note the wordplay, boy I loved, as opposed to boyfriend. I knew he was seeing other girls, but during that summer between high school and college, I equated love with danger, and Lord knows I needed some. 4 years of A's, a scholarship to a swanky school out east, goody-goody rep that was a total coping mechanism, all of which made my love for the boy I loved a total cliche. I spread quilts on my bedroom floor to silence my footsteps, removed the window screen, and climbed 2 stories down a fairly precarious satellite antenna. The boy I loved was waiting at the lake behind my house, and we rode out across the glass-like water, a million stars reflecting above. It was beautiful. Mid-Michigan, mid-May, our bodies tangled in the bottom of the boat. The sun had risen by the time I climbed back up the antenna, and as I struggled to replace the window screen, I heard footsteps outside my door. Megan? It was my dad. And I dove fully dressed under the covers and held my heartbeat. He'd heard me. He must have heard me. Their room was just below mine. Get downstairs, he said through the door, and I was not invincible then. I was the opposite of invincible. I was screwed. We sat in the living room, a place reserved for the most serious conversations. I counted squares in the oriental rug and wished my parents would say something, anything, please anything, besides, did you have sex in the rowboat? So when they told me that they were getting a divorce, it's fair to say I'd asked for it. I remember they sat on opposite sides of the couch. I remember 40 squares in the rug. Did I cry? Did we talk about how love isn't roaming around over the stars or 26 years of marriage? Did we talk about how no one is ever invincible? I don't remember. What I do remember is that neither of them moved out, and the tension in that house was so heavy I thought my bones would crack. I did everything I could to avoid it, making out with the boy I loved, staying over with friends, wandering zombie-like through the aisles of a 24-hour Meijer until finally deciding that I might as well earn some money. And so, barbecue sandwiches, Philly beef and Swiss, curly fries dumped into the wire baskets, dipped into oil, wait till they cool, wait till the end of a shift, wait till I could leave for college and jump off the ledge 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And after a while, standing over that deep fryer with its boiling wire, I started to imagine what would happen if I pressed the inside of my forearm against the basket, connecting my skin with the sizzling crosshatch. That would be something, certainly. 3 months is not a long time, but that summer, a glacier, a watched pot. I'd look at the clock above the food line, shocked that only a few minutes had passed since the last time I looked. To pass time, I counted onion rings and wished for something, anything, please, anything, to happen. So when the boy I loved came in to tell me about that other girl and how she was pregnant, it's fair to say I asked for it. I remember we sat across from each other in the shiny vinyl booths. I remember the smell, Arby's in my hair, Arby's under my fingernails, Arby's up my nose. Did I cry? Did I say awful things, trying to pick a fight? Because if he was standing there yelling, at least he'd still be standing there. I don't remember. What I do remember is chicken tenders, horsey sauce, curly fries dumped into boiling oil. It was August, 2 weeks left, and I could jump. A new life, new people, new heartbreak. And for the 1000th time, I wondered what it would feel like to lay my forearm against that basket, to solder my wrist to the wire, to smell my own flesh burn through to the bone, to be an active participant in my life instead of responding to what was happening to me, to do something, to do something. So I did. My arm and the wire were in contact for only a second, but that's all it takes. I screamed and stuck my left arm into the ice bin, still holding the sizzling basket of fries in my other hand. Coworkers must have found me there. They must have brought me to the emergency burn station. They must have asked what happened, because I remember saying it had been an accident. I'd been careless, I told them, even though hurting myself had taken all the care in the world. Later at freshman orientation, I would wear long sleeves to cover the bandage, and later still, a 4-inch leather cuff to hide the scar, a purplish rectangle of chicken wire that would, over time, fade to a horizontal line bisected by 2 smaller lines. In other words, an F. F is for fear. F is for fly. F is for French fries. Later, I get a job as a food runner at a fancy Southwestern restaurant. Cheese sticks, stuffed mushrooms, jalapeno poppers in wire mesh baskets, boiling oil like knife tips on my skin. And later, after I left that college and another, left the country and another, I'd find myself in Chicago in a bar with a woman I didn't know how to love. When she reached to pay for my drink, her long sleeves pushed back, revealing faded scars that climbed from wrist to forearm. That night was the first time I talked about what I'd done, how I didn't know why I did it, and how now, 20 years later, I still can't explain that pull towards danger. There is no snap, 21, and now I understand it. Snap, 31, and now I've healed. Snap, 39, and here I am, invincible. It was only me, on the edge of my life. The whole world is spread out before me. God, what if? There are so many paths to becoming a writer, and I never thought that the way that I got here, I didn't know that any of it was an option. I know that some of you are thinking about, excuse me, sorry about that thing. I never thought that I would end up doing this work professionally via telling stories out loud to people in bars. But I tell you all of that because you never know what will happen to the work once you give it a chance to live in the world. You never know how it will travel. Not long after I wrote and started performing the piece I just read to you, I wrote a piece about healing from postpartum depression by stalking my next door neighbor with a wireless baby video monitor. I performed it at a bar in front of 200 very drunk people. It is an interesting exercise in audience to sit down and make work for people who are drunk. I think often, maybe when you sit down to make work, maybe you're making it for friends or for teachers or for school, right? What might happen if you change your idea of who the audience is, right? I sat down to make that work thinking, how am I going to get these people's attention? How am I going to hold it? I performed that piece at 11 o'clock at night, right? So all of that made me think about how I would use language to try to grab people's attention and to hold it. It made me think about the images that I would use, right? It's an entirely different process than me sitting down to write about Chicago politics for the New York Times, right? That's a very different audience. And for me, sometimes the different audiences that I'm writing for affect some of the choices that I make, right? It's not making the work any less me, but it's me really thinking about the people who are on the other end of that work and how I want to try to connect with them. So I made this piece about postpartum depression. I performed it for the drunk people. There was an editor in the room that night. Her name is Roxanne Gay. Maybe some of you have read her work. She's very widely published. She asked if she could publish the essay. A couple months later, I got an email from another writer named Cheryl Strayed saying she just picked it for the Best American Essays. It's being shot right now as a film. I've recorded it for NPR and Radio National Australia. It's been reprinted hundreds of times. It's a 1,200 word piece. It's like a page and a half long, right? But that one piece that I wrote to tell out loud in a bar has completely changed everything having to do with my career. To this day, I get hundreds of emails from new parents, mostly moms, but sometimes the men and women who love them as well too, who are kind of in the thick of that first year and trying to figure out what's happening. I see the essay passed around on Twitter to postpartum support groups. Again, I wrote it to tell the drunk people in the bar. You never ever know what's going to happen to your work, right? You take your heart and you put it on a piece of paper, and then it doesn't belong to you anymore. You see how it moves out through the world. So after this happened, I also got an agent, got a new book deal, and then all of a sudden it's time to tell people what my next project is. And I had no idea what that was going to be. I was a little terrified to even think about what a project might be. You know, I had a full-time job, I had a little kid, I was kind of trying to juggle all these things. And then my apartment burnt to the ground. And that, I don't know if anyone has had that experience where literally you have 5 minutes to get out of the place, and I have a baby, right? So you have the 5 minutes to get out. And something happened just in my body then. Like I'd never felt fear on that kind of level before, right? So kind of starting with that experience, I started walking around thinking about fear, which I think is a pretty important subject to be talking about, especially like right now in our country. What are the things that we're afraid of, and how do we face them, and why? So that's what the most recent book is about. 17 Personalist is all about fear. I'll read you the introduction. A lifetime or two ago, I lived with my friends Heather and Pete on Armitage Avenue, just west of Western. Our apartment was a unicorn so far as renting in Chicago. An enormous open loft, wallpapered with windows and cheap as hell. A hallway snaked back to 2 smaller rooms, one for me, one for Heather, and behind those, what realtors called the master bedroom, huge, with high ceilings and a skylight. This was Pete's room. He paid double. He had a 9-to-5 job in an art studio with a salary and health insurance, which to me seems so grown up and impossible, especially for an artist, but he did it. He made art and he made a living. And if he could, I could. At 23, I needed that belief like food and sex and shelter. When he let me, I would sit on the floor in his room while he painted, reading aloud from the novels I was studying. And sometimes, if I felt brave, my own nervous starts at stories. I loved being there, part of it, the process, the mess, tubes and brushes and sketches and ashtrays overflowing so he'd ash into empty beer bottles, or in mugs filled with days-old coffee, or mugs filled with paint water, or mugs filled with whiskey or wine. I don't think we owned any glassware. I don't think we washed any dishes. It made more sense to avoid the stacked piles in the kitchen sink and instead grab a mug off Pete's floor and scrub out the moldy coffee cream in the bathtub. He didn't have any furniture, just a mattress on the floor, a cage for his iguana, and canvases. Finished pieces, half-done stuff still dripping. He painted bodies. He painted abstract. He painted me, circus poster style, biting the head off a live chicken after I read him the scene from the novel Geek Love, where Aquaboy is preaching to the devoted. If they love you, it must mean you're all right, Aquaboy says. You poor baby, you just want to feel all right. Read that part again, Pete said, pointing at me with a paintbrush. He was muscle and sinew, arms full-sleeved with black geometric tattoos. He had a long, pointy goatee a decade before hipsters and, what's it called, beard art. He wore a belligerent uniform of black jeans and no shirt, never a shirt. He must have owned some, at least for work, or our crappy Chicago winters. Band logo stuff, probably. Slayer, Black Sabbath, Behold the Living Corpse. I'm trying to see him. I'm reaching down the line of my life. Memory is portraiture, a still shot instead of a moving picture. He smelled like cigarettes. He built me bookshelves. He'd make both fists into devil horns, yell, metal, and stick his tongue down past his chin. He pointed at me with a paintbrush. You poor baby, you just want to feel all right. For my birthday, he took me to the Art Institute. We were there for hours. He taught me to see. I hope that doesn't sound pretentious. It was actually a gift. We went painting by painting, color, context, scale. I'd be ready to move on, and he'd tell me to wait. Look again. Look closer. What do you see? He'd say. How was it made? What was happening in the world when it was made? How did what was happening in the world influence what was being made? What are you gonna make? And when are you gonna start? Now, I'd say. Today. The questions we ask about art are equally vital in examining the self. Memory and assumption, love and fear. I'd build on this vocabulary over 2 decades teaching writers and teaching teachers, but I first started thinking about it with Pete in the Art Institute, standing in front of Egon Schiele. My favorite is Sky Above Clouds, a 24-foot oil painting by Georgia O'Keeffe. It hangs above the back gallery staircase, the ceiling diffused sunlight. It's beautiful, blue and pink and a sea of white clouds like cobblestones. I see it like a road, a path. You can walk down the stairs or up into the sky. The truth? I was in love with him. How could I not be, there under the clouds? Nothing happened, of course. He was my roommate. He was my friend. He didn't like me like that. It would have gotten weird. I'd been hurt before. Everything ends badly. Breakups are awful. Divorce requires paperwork. Juliet dies in the end. The iguana smelled. I hated metal. What if he didn't feel the same and I had to stop imagining us together? The video on demand as I fell asleep at night. Uncertainty is better, wrote Chekhov. At least then there's hope. What if we did get together and I hurt him? I didn't want to hurt him. I loved him. So much so that I'd bug him about the cigarettes and he'd tell me to back off, and I'd quote statistics about lung-related death, and he'd say, well, we can all go at any time, wiped out by a bus, a train, an explosion like lightning, a heart attack on a mountain, a tumor in the brain, the skin, the breast, by your own hand when it's all too much, or an AR-15 in a school or park or street, so who gives a shit about a cigarette, what's healthy or right or fair? There are so many reasons not to try. They all start with, I'm scared. Okay, so the title of this book it's called The Wrong Way to Save Your Life. I wrote about my building, catching on fire for the New York Times. I filed it, and then my editor asked if I would write about the upcoming mayoral election. This is happening in Chicago in 2015. He asked me if I had any thoughts on Rahm Emanuel. I said I have a lot of thoughts on Rahm Emanuel. They're not positive. And he said, well, will you write about it? And I had never written about politics on such a large platform before, and I was scared. I was afraid of that, and I tried to talk myself out of it. I spent 2 days trying to talk myself out of it, and then the essay that I wrote about fire went live. I know we all follow how comments happen on the internet, right? So right away there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments following that fire essay. Many of them, most of them, were wonderful. But there was one woman, and she emailed me through my website to my personal address. She emailed me through the college where I teach. She emailed me through the theater company where I work. She emailed me across all social media platforms, including Google+, which I had not checked in like 10 years and didn't even remember that I had an account. And all her email said, it said it in all caps, it said, "That was the wrong way to save your life." And she was talking about how I ran from a burning building with a baby. And it was kind of this moment of, God, people are gonna come after us for anything that we say. So we may as well say some things that matter. And that moment felt really huge for me and the work that I want to make in the world, and this book in particular, and what I wanted to do with it in talking about fear. That if I was going to interrogate my own fear, I had to be strong about it, and I had to be honest, and I had to be brave. So that's where this book came from. Now, I spent most of 2017 touring it. 2017 was a pretty interesting time in this country to be touring a book about fear. I was in Las Vegas the week that the shooting happened. I was in St. Louis the week that the police officer who killed Mike Brown was acquitted. I was on Sanibel Island the week that Hurricane Irma hit. I was with 300 middle school students the day after Parkland. I work with a lot of young female college students following the Access Hollywood tapes, Weinstein, Kavanaugh. And in all of these conversations, I've been really blown away by how someone's story can give us an in to talk about things that are really, really necessary to be talking about in this world. And especially for me, the conversations I've had working with young artists have been the most important. So much of the dialogue that's running right now about what needs to change in our country is happening by people who are my age. And I'm interested in the work that you are all making, whether that's an essay or a song or a poem or a play or a dance or a video game or whatever it is, that however it's coming out of you, this is the work that I think that needs to be elevated. So if there's anything that you walk away from this conversation with today, I hope it'll be that what you're doing matters. There's a whole lot of people who are making work who are my age, who are trying to find work that's written by people who are your age, and trying to see what you're seeing right now, and to hear your thoughts on how we can make these things better. I have a quick thing to read at the end, but we have some time for questions, so I'm wondering if there's any way that I can maybe be of use to you all right now. Is there anything that you'd like to know? I can't really see out there, so. Yes, hit it. Yeah. 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 Well, I read everything, and I would say, I do this thing with a Kaplan student, the Kaplan Institute every year, where I talk to college freshmen, right? So when I did this is a good question. This past fall, young guy, this college freshman, raised his hand and said, "So when did you decide that you were only going to write memoir?" And I was like, "No, dude, I'm working on a novel right now. I do screenplay stuff. I do script work. I mean, if you have the idea, you don't have to lock yourself into one genre. You don't have to lock yourself into one art form. It's going to come out of you in all sorts of different ways, right?" And much of how I form essays is informed by reading fiction, like by reading narratives, scene building. So I'm still super into sci-fi. I think though I'm watching a lot more sci-fi than I am reading it right now. I'm watching Orphan Black right now. I'm really into that. My favorite TV show is Firefly. I have a T-shirt that says Trump canceled Firefly. I don't know, have you guys seen Firefly? It's cowboys in space. I mean, it does not get any better than that. But all of that informs the work. I don't know if any of y'all read Ray Bradbury, but he's one of my favorites. He has this great line about how he never has a dry spell in art making because he feeds himself well. He reads comic books and graphic novels and articles and poetry, and so you got to take all of it in, I think. Does that kind of help? Hi. That's a great question. I have not published any poetry. I read a ton of it. That's like the one genre that I have not published in, and I elevate it so high, and I read it often, and I think my understanding of language is deeply performed by poets, especially slam poets in Chicago. I'm really into Nate Marshall's stuff, Fatima Asghar's stuff. I'm really into Jamila Woods' work, and I think the work that she's doing as a musician, No Name, and so I mean we're really into how poetry and music are kind of cross-sectioning together. So yeah, love it. Have not published it. Scared to. Should probably do it now that we've had this conversation. Yeah. Do I want to write a sci-fi novel? Yes. The novel that I'm working on right now is I wouldn't call it sci-fi, but more magical realism. Like my favorite writer is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Is that? Oh, great. Okay, great. I love it so much. And Clarice Lispector, one of my favorite short stories, is The Smallest Woman in the World. But I'm really interested in how magic happens in an everyday life. And I think I get myself into trouble sometimes when I'm on nonfiction panels, because I think I've learned more about truth by reading fiction. Garcia Marquez has a book called Love in the Time of the Cholera, and there's this moment where the main guy is like walking through this market, and he sees the woman that he's in love with there with her new husband, and he immediately starts to imagine all the ways that this new husband might die, like these terrible ways. And I had just broken up with a dude, like when I first read that book, and I was like, God, that is so true, because I'd seen the guy out at a bar with the new girl that he was dating, and then I'd started to imagine all these terrible things that would happen to her. I'm not painting myself in a very good light. I'm actually a very good human being, but you know, your heart is broken on the ground. But I just remember like so deeply connecting with the truth of that moment, like what it's like when your heart is hurting. So that's I get that from magical realism. I get that from sci-fi. I get that from the imagination. And I think that our imagination is just as much a part of memoir as our memory. So, yeah. So the question was, have there been people who encouraged you to write or encouraged you not to write? It was my teachers. It was always my teachers who were encouraging my work and letting me know that the work had value and that it mattered. And I mean both the work that I made, but also in conversations about books, right? Like my teachers always wanting to hear more of me, encouraging me to continue a piece or to take it into my journal or putting different books in my hands to read. And that happening, you know, all the way from like middle school up through graduate school is I mean, think about what this work is. Like we put our heart on a piece of paper and then we hand it to a teacher. That's an incredible act of trust. And I think as a teacher now, I work really hard to be worthy of that, just because I remember so clearly like all of the teachers along the way who let me know that it mattered. And it was just those moments of being seen that really made me think that I could do this. So it was always my teachers. I think the only people who ever told me that I couldn't do it are, I'm a woman who publishes widely on the internet. So I get dudes coming up into my Twitter who have thoughts. Great, have your thoughts, dudes. I'm gonna keep going. So, all right. How are we? We got like 10 minutes. I can read a thing for you real quick, but I have time for a couple of other questions if anybody wants to hit it. Yeah? what books am I recommending right now is the question. I am, my favorite writer publishing right now is named Samantha Irby. I don't know if anybody reads her stuff. She's a humor essayist. She has a new book coming out in March, there's an essay from it in the New Yorker today, so you can go read her online. Her Twitter handle is Word Science. Be careful reading her stuff, just because, so when I first read it, her last book was called We're Never Meeting in Real Life. I got on the L downtown and then I started reading it, and it is so funny. So I was laughing my ass off at it on the train and making a little bit of a spectacle of myself, and people actually started moving away from me, like I couldn't, like I was starting to cry, I was laughing so hard. And her stuff is really, really raunchy and amazing. And I first saw her perform her stuff. I mean, she's from Chicago originally, so I first saw her perform the stuff in bars. And so for those of you who want to be writing, who are theater artists, if you start taking your work into Chicago, you're going to see that the literary community in Chicago, the theater community, and the music community are all tangled together in all sorts of incredible ways. So way before Sam was on the national bestseller list, she was doing her work in bars. So I'm recommending her a lot right now, just mostly because I need to laugh. I'm walking around, I feel like ready to throw stuff all of the time. And that's a reason why now I do throw axes regularly. I do it twice a week. It completely infuriates my father, who's a salmon fisherman, and he lives on an island in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska. And he doesn't understand why I'm paying to throw axes, right? Because, you know, in his house, like, you just walk into the front yard and you throw stuff. And I don't think, like, we do not need any white middle-aged women, like, running around with axes in the middle of downtown Chicago. So anyway, I belong to an axe throwing league. You rent a lane, kind of like a bowling alley, and then they give you an axe and then you just throw it for an hour, which for me, that is a very good anger management. I'm also doing an essay right now for Mark Bittman's magazine. He's a food critic at the New York Times, but the essay is about rage through food preparation. So I've been spatchcocking chickens for a friend of mine who's a chef. I don't know if you know, I didn't know what spatchcocking was, but it's when you flip the bird inside out and rip out its spine so you can lay it flat. So I've been like ripping spines out of live chickens and now writing about it. And so again, I think when I was introduced as a professional author, and yes, that means you sit in front of a computer and you rip out your hair and try to write sentences, but it also means, like, what are you doing and what are you living and what are you experiencing to try to understand the world better? I think I just lost you all when I talked about spines, right? Is it like, did we kind of go south? It's high literary work, ripping up spines. But I think that's something that I do a lot, is I'll think like, okay, I'm trying to hit on a certain theme, so what is the thing that I can do to get at that theme? I just got commissioned to do a piece about shock, right? And again, this is something that happens. Someone will say to you, hey, give me 1,000 words on Rahm Emanuel, give me 5,000 words on shock, give me 10,000 words on anger. And then it's up to you in your imagination to sit and figure out the way that you as an artist want to tackle this particular theme, right? So that's a big part of this work as well, just as much as our understanding of grammar. All right, so real quick, I think we just have a few more minutes. Do you want axes or fire? Axes, okay. All right, so this is the beginning of the axe essay. I throw two-handed, fists stacked at the base of the axe handle. My right foot is at the line, my left just behind, and I rock. My weight shifting forward, back, forward, back. This strength is mine. This body, mine. The target, concentric rings painted on 2x10 pine boards and drilled into the wall. It's 15 feet in front of me. 15 feet is the full rotation of an axe. When I started throwing axes, I read articles by physicists about velocity and angle and centrifugal force. I read governing rules from the National Axe Throwing Federation and the World Axe Throwing League, including etiquette, scoring, and foot faults. I watched countless instructional videos, the majority featuring dudes in fields, and one where the actor Jason Momoa nails a bullseye while drinking a very large beer. I watched that last one many times. Feet still staggered, I bring both hands back over my head. The blade is straight. I'm leaning back. My elbows are at my ears, and I'm gripping the handle, and everything in me, I don't know how else to say this, sighs. The knots in my neck untie, brambles in my back untangle. This is what child's pose used to feel like. The relaxation, the release. But yoga isn't working for me right now. Neither is bourbon. I've been drinking too much. Or sleeping, not much at all. Or deep breaths, or petting dogs, or social media breaks, or any of 1,000 things we do to stay calm. Don't tell me to be calm. I am not calm. I could explode this city with the force of my rage. I let go of the axe. Sliced air and the gunshot of steel on board. The blade sinks and sticks in the splintered wood, just to the right of the third ring. That's okay. I don't care about points. I'm not here to win. I'm not here to compete in a league or hang out with friends or even hit the target. I want to split open. If you go axe throwing, you can tag me on Instagram. It is actually very cathartic for me that as this essay has traveled, people tag me now whenever they go axe throwing, and so now I'm getting to kind of relive the rage a little bit every day through all of these strangers who were throwing stuff. Also, a guy that I don't know made me axe t-shirts on Twitter and is selling them, which is very weird. And then there's a axe throwing women's league that started based on my essay it's called the Lizzie Bordens, and they just sent me a jacket. I don't even know, again, you don't know how the work is going to travel. You make it and you put it into the world, and then it belongs to the people who carried it. So thank you for carrying my work, and thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.